Hi, this is Tom, and you are listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. Getting to Third Space is produced by Tenacious Change, a consultancy committed to creating resilient, nonprofit organizations. This podcast is available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts. Wherever you listen to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom, be sure to subscribe to hear about new episodes when they become available. Also, be sure to share this podcast with friends, colleagues, and family. The more people join us, the quicker we get to third space as a society. Hey, Lamar, how you doing today?
Doing good. How about you, Tom?
Not too bad. Hey, how cold is it out there?
Oh my gosh, it is so cold this morning.
How cold is it?
I got up this morning and I saw a dog jump starting a rabbit. That's almost true.
Yeah. Well, it's not much warmer here. That's why I'm wearing earmuffs, man.
Hey, you look good in earmuffs.
Well, thank you. No, actually, I'm having a microphone malfunction. So I've gone to this other headset that I use this a lot of times for phone calls when people don't have to look at me or I don't have to be seen by them because they work so well. Well, thank you very much. I just maybe I'll just walk around wearing these all of the time now. So
by the way, it was actually that cold this morning. It was like 8 below when I got up this morning.
Oh my gosh.
My dog kept wanting to get out. Yeah, why at 8 below? Other than to do the normal dog things.
Yeah.
But then I went out a little bit later and I saw there were rabbit tracks everywhere. So yes, he was jump starting a rabbit this morning.
Wow. Okay. Well, good for him. Good for him.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, so we probably ought to get right to it because I think we got a lot we're doing today, right?
Oh, we got a lot. Yeah, we have a lot going on, and we're going to kind of take a little bit of a rabbit trail today. If that's okay.
Do we got to jumpstart the rabbit first?
We just did.
Okay.
So today in this podcast, we're going to explore where we can exercise some of our third space conversations. We've been talking a lot about how third space conversations should happen and kind of how to keep how to plan and kind of assess how those are going. But we haven't talked about where. And you and I were thinking about and talking about this podcast we had with Seth Kaplan, an episode, and we just dropped the episodes 1 and 2 previous to this podcast. And he responded to a question that I asked him that I think it's really important that we literally share spaces and share places. And he suggested that places like, how do we build trust? We build trust by sitting down with people, having meals, for example, having drink together, socializing are all ways to build trust. And you and I began talking about that offline later on and finding this to be a really important topic to discuss. Now, oftentimes in the literature, third space that we've talked about happens in a third place. So today we're going to talk about places, not to be confused necessarily with spaces as we have been talking, but we're talking about places where the third space conversations can take place. Ray Oldenburg was an urban sociologist who wrote about informal gathering places. His most notable book about these places was titled Great Good Place, 1999. Victor Herman, who was the publisher of that book, wrote in his testimonial, "The great good place has put into words and focus what I've been doing all of my life. In the barbershop I remember as a child to the bookstore I now own." Ray Oldenburg has defined good places while still recognizing the magical chemistry they require. So we want to talk about what those good places are and the experiences you and I have had with good places.
Yeah, I think this really sounds like it's going to be. We haven't done it yet, obviously, but I think this is going to be a good conversation because there is this real. I love that phrase that the magical chemistry they require, And
Right.
sometimes to be in a third space requires a third place that has, or a place that has that chemistry. I'll also just mention that more recently, Oldenburg's work has also been cited by the folks that are working on the Blue Zones projects, and the Blue Zones are these places around the globe where people thrive. They have longer lives, they have more satisfying lives, and one of the things that they point out is that the reason that these blue zone one of the reasons that people do so well in these blue zones is because they have these places that they can connect with other people and really build strong, really good relationships. But there's another article that you brought my attention to, Lamar, and that was the Butler and Diaz article for Brookings, um, and they said that the third places, and again, they were quoting Oldenburg here, are those places where we spend time between first place, which is home, and second place, which is where we work. So we brainstormed a little bit about what makes places different, these places different from one another, which means, by the way, that we engaged in wild but informed speculation. So that's how we came up with this list. So if you go trying to find this somewhere in the literature, you might,
Yep.
but it'll, these lists just kind of came out of our heads today. So
Sometimes that's dangerous when we brainstorm, but
it really is. But
it is a lot of fun.
it's just cold today, and so we had to do something to jumpstart our own brains a little bit. So. Well, so we're going to kind of go back and forth a little bit and think about this together. But that first place that they mention is home.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we've been thinking a little bit about why home might be that first place where we are able to really kind of find ourselves. And there's several reasons. Home is familiar, right? I can get up in the middle of the night and walk around my house and not stub my toe. I think that's a pretty good thing. I mean, that's just how familiar the space is to me, right?
That's a good thing, although
Yeah,
it doesn't always happen, but it is a good thing. Yeah.
yeah. And we can be ourselves, right?
In all forms, we can be ourselves. It was just, the way we talk, the way we interact, and even being able to interact with family without even saying complete sentences sometimes.
Well, or my family used to communicate, I think, most of the time in idioms and cliches.
Oh,
And,
give us an example, please.
well, my brother-in-law used to say, he got on that faster than a duck on a June bug. What? I've never seen a duck jump on a June bug, so I have no idea what that phenomenon is even like. But we had a whole string of those kinds of things, and
Right.
it's like you could have conversations and reasonably kind of know what everybody was talking about. And it made no sense to anybody else. And I find living on the East Coast now, coming out of Iowa and that
Mm-hmm.
family where we spoke like that, I come out here and all of a sudden one of these things will come flying out of my mouth, and people look at me like, "What happened to you? Did you just have a moment there, or what's going on?" So
Well, and I think too that kind of the culture that we grew up with, and the culture maybe our parents came from, had a lot of impact on how we communicated and related at home as well.
yeah,
My family came from a very much a German background,
yeah,
and kind of a Swiss German background, and oftentimes sentences or descriptions were punctuated by German words,
yeah.
and or my father would kind of go into that German dialect, and we understand what he was saying, but I'm sure people around us didn't understand what he was saying. But I also understand, I was able to understand meanings behind how we communicated. So it wasn't just always about words, but it was about what the implications were, um, that my father or my mom were trying to communicate to us. It wasn't always spelled out in words, but I knew what the meaning was.
It's you just said something that just is really wild because my wife and I just went on a Christmas market tour in
Hmm.
Germany just before the holidays, and I never really thought of there being and so my last name is Klaus, of course, which is
Hmm.
extremely German. My mother's name was Miller, which is also very German, and but I never thought of myself as being really raised in much of a Germanic culture. But as we were traveling around in Germany and going to these various Christmas markets, I all of a sudden began to hear phrases and songs that I had never related to that German heritage that were spoken by my parents. And I go, "Oh wow. I mean, I actually know what that means." And it was really interesting. So there you're right, the culture does kind of influence. Now, but one of the other things that happens in families, though, is that sometimes we don't have a lot of filters, or the filter's just completely off, right? I mean,
That's correct.
there are no filters.
So we say things, or we have these relationships with our family or the people who are close to us, whether they're good, whether they're bad, or whether they're ugly, to kind of quote the movies a little bit. But it is true. We're committed to each other. We're connected to each other, um, and we see the best and the worst of each other sometimes.
Yeah. Now, Lamar, do you ever find yourself kind of stuck in a role or an identity within your family that just doesn't change no matter how old you get?
So I'm 65, Tom. I'm still the baby of the family. I'm the youngest of five boys, and it comes across oftentimes in our conversations with each other. And it's hilarious. My wife loves watching it as well. But, you know, let me explain to you, Lamar, exactly how this works. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and I'm actually the baby in my family too. And you have all older brothers. I had all older sisters. And so it's like all of them decided they were going to mother me in one way or another. And it was like, holy cow. I mean, this is a little bit much. I think the thing that I have noticed is that until the day I die or my sisters pass, right? I will always be when I show up back home, Tommy. Now, that is not my favorite name for myself, and I swear to God,
It
if
may show up
if
sometime. No, I wouldn't do
anybody,
it.
I mean, I will come and get you in the middle of the night. So,
Yeah.
but but
So,
but it's not my favorite name.
yeah.
I don't really care for it because it not only it sounds very juvenile for me. It also it reminds me of my position, but and of course maybe that's why they use it. I don't know, but
But in families, that's all ingrained in us. I
oh
mean,
yeah,
over time is deep seated, and so how we relate to each other sometimes even looks disrespectful, and maybe at times, but it is part of who we are. I remember when my mother, who's passed away several years ago, but when my mother was no longer able to drive because of some dementia that she was experiencing, and us boys got together with her, and she realized that we had not returned her car to her to drive, and she made a it was in that conversation somewhere she made a very very motherly comment to all of us as we were standing there, letting us know exactly how she felt about some things. And I looked around, and I, along with my brothers, we had just all dropped our heads like, yes, mom. And we were in our 50s and 60s at the time.
yeah,
So
yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, but despite some of those things that happen, there also is a bond that exists
absolutely.
in the family, and let's be really honest. Sometimes that bond is a very healthy bond, and sometimes it's not a very healthy bond. But there are bonds that hold families, keep them connected, and tend to hold families together.
There's a certain amount of safety in that, in those relationships as well, in that we
Yeah.
can speak to each other, we can support each other. You know, oftentimes maybe my brothers or I might not agree on everything, but don't come in between us. I
Yeah.
mean, there is a desire to help each other, to support each other. Uh, but and even when we tussle a bit, it's our tussle that we have. It's not someone else's to step into. So there's a certain amount of that kind of a this is our family. There are boundaries to it, and there are rules to it that keep us together.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we share ideas, and sometimes we share dreams and disappointments and fears and successes and, popcorn, pizza, shoe fly pies, stuff like that as a family, right?
That absolutely, and sometimes we teach each other how to make. I just taught my granddaughters over the weekend how to make shoe fly pie, by the way, and
Ooh.
which is a staple in my family,
Well,
and so I was pretty excited.
now your wife needs to teach them how to make cinnamon rolls so that if I live to be 100, I can still get them from.
Yeah, that'll be next. So Tom, we were talking about first place,
But
which is our family.
but you know what? Before we move off of that though, I think it's probably important to say that even though families can be a really great first place for many many things, we are in a moment in our history that they can be difficult places around
Absolutely.
this whole discussion around politics. And of course, we're recording this the day after the Iowa caucuses, right?
Right.
And which we did not participate in because we don't live in Iowa anymore. But um, you know, I also know that as tight as families can be, there are some things that can really put wedges between people, and I think we're in one of those moments right now.
I think you're right. And if you recall back on the very first episode that we did, I
Yeah,
talked about the moment that I realized that my brothers and I were at different places
yeah,
when it came to politics, when it came to religion, when it
yeah,
came to business practices. So, um, things that we really don't spend a lot of time talking about, which in the past, maybe we could do that.
yeah,
And that does bring us back to why the whole concept of the third space is an important concept.
yeah.
But in first place, uh, these kind of challenges do exist. And unfortunately, it seems like we're hearing more and more about kind of the experience I was talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you want to introduce us to the
Sure. Second
second
place.
place? Oh,
Yeah.
that sounds really bad. It's like, oh, but you're not first place. I mean,
Uh, I think of a baseball diamond. You get to first base, but you want to go to the second. So
right? Yes.
getting into that second place, Oldenburg would say second place is at work.
Yeah.
And at work, there's, unless you have a family business, which there's a whole other dynamic there. But work would be more where you're relating with a broader group of people and broader tasks and different kind of focuses. We even come to work and typically we'll have a different identity at work than we do at home. Maybe an identity that has to do with our skill set or has to do with the roles that we play, whether they're subjective roles or whether they're leadership type roles. But we do come with a different identity, usually to the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the thinking back to the interview we did with Seth,
Hmm.
and we asked him a question about, is there a moment that you've been in a conversation with somebody that's that was just difficult, and how did you do? And the first thing that comes to his mind is his 5-year-old, right?
Right.
And I think that point kind of illustrates too that in this second place of being at work is that we may be seen in such a very different way than what we're seeing in that first place. And there's no, here's Seth. He is this world-renowned expert on um, fragile states and fragile neighborhoods. And like so many of us, he's wrestling with his 5-year-old, right? And trying to get the 5-year-old to do what he needs him to do. And so that identity that we have at work can be sometimes it can feel very comforting to us when we're think about struggling with that child at home.
Right.
Or
Well,
how come I can't get the dog to walk right?
absolutely. And at work, we take on other responsibilities
Yeah, we
though
do.
sometimes, and um, the responsibilities sometimes we're happy at. We're going to talk about this maybe in the future, but we kind of shift between these places,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's good. You've heard leave your work at work. Don't take it home with you. Uh, and depending on what your role is, that's maybe easier in some roles than others. But being able to realize that this is a place where I have certain responsibilities, I have certain things that I need to do, and I need to take care of. That maybe I feel more confident about because I've learned how to do these kinds of things. I in addition, I have other people I can collaborate with.
Yeah.
I can be creative with, and we can work together to get the job completed or done.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really important. And of course, so much of that really hinges upon our ability to communicate with others well, and to be, clear
Absolutely.
about what we're hoping is going to happen. Um, and at work as well. I mean, there's the relationships that we have inside the workplace. But sometimes our work also requires us to build relationships outside the business. Now, they're a little bit different than friendships. We may establish a collegial relationship. We may establish an affiliation with somebody else outside the work. It's not quite the same as a friendship, so we may not have the same depth of interaction, but it's still important. And it's a place where we can establish connections that actually can become friendships. Just before Christmas, I lost a colleague. He passed very suddenly. That We began as competitors in the
Hmm.
same field, and we actually met each other as we were kind of having dueling or competing booths at trade shows. And we got to know each other, and over time, we stopped being so much competitors and really became friends and colleagues, and we helped each other out in the various things that we were doing. And in this last stage, we were just simply friends. And I think about the even within business, even in the workplace, we can establish the seeds of friendship with people, even if in that moment and in that place that a close friendship is not the best thing for business, right? So
Understandably, but as you work close with people, you develop connections with them at
yeah,
whatever level you let those connections be. Oftentimes, if you're on projects together or you're working towards a common outcome, you share goals and you
yeah,
share processes and you share projects together and ideas of how to resolve whatever it is interfering with your ability to get to that goal. I mean,
yeah,
problem solving is a big part of things at the workplace. I'm very fortunate in that I have friends from almost all walks of my career
yeah,
that we were working towards, and sometimes I'm working through some incredibly difficult situations,
yeah,
and where you leaned on each other to be able to get through them
yeah,
and to be successful. And those to me are lifelong friends. And even though we're no longer working together, those
hmm,
relationships I built in the workplace, I really feel even now, years past those incidents, if I know I can go back and depend on those same individuals because we've shared those experiences in the workplace.
yeah, yeah. And the real beauty too that happens in terms of the relationships that we build at work is it really does build our own competencies with regard
Oh,
to our careers. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge the fact that there probably is a level of caution
Yeah,
that we
that's right.
exercise in terms of relationships in the workplace, but it doesn't mean we can't build relationships and let them be the place that we begin to seed them. Although I also have to say though, in terms of what's happened since the pandemic, right? With
Yeah,
so many people working at home. So both my wife and I work at home. As I know, you and your wife work at home, right? Well, you're not technically working, right? Oh, technically, but you are.
I'm not working for anybody. Let's put it
yeah,
that way.
yeah, right. But but my wife has her office across the on the other side of the living room here. Which, if you could see this, you'd see our living room right here. On the other side of the living room is her office, and she's teaching Spanish classes in there about
Mhm.
4 days a week. And sometimes those things get really raucous. I mean, loud and laughing and everything else. And I have to go and quietly shut her door if I'm trying to record a podcast with you or doing something else that requires a little bit more concentration. So that can make things a little rough. Sometimes when we're working at home, that really kind of pours over into that first place that we were talking about. But generally, it works very, very well. Where it probably doesn't work well, and I think you've had this experience as well, is that when we bring into the relationships at work issues around politics and socially charged culture war kinds of issues,
Right,
it can get dicey.
right. And the work that I did for a lot of years was I would develop teams, and I would lead those teams through different projects or had certain responsibilities. And when when conversations would happen about kind of personal um, perspectives on whether it's politics or some other sort of event or concept that was not about work. While I didn't want to always say we couldn't talk about those kinds of things, sometimes they got in the way of working relationships and and the projects and the goals that we needed to accomplish in the workplace. And so, my role sometimes would say, okay, this is not a helpful conversation. Certainly, you can have it at another time, but right now, we need to put that aside. Let's focus on the tasks at hand and the responsibilities we have. So it can be a challenge in the workplace. If we're using the workplace environment as a way to even address some of the issues that we might want to address in a third space conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess that brings us to the third place, which is our community. Odenberg's concept was that the third place is really exists between the first place and the second place, and 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 it's a place where you can connect with others outside of those two realms. So what comes to mind for me, I'm just going to knock off a couple three things here. Lamar, you probably got some things like community celebrations and holiday events. I know in my hometown the 4th of July was a big one, right?
Yeah. We
Yeah.
used to go to your hometown on the 4th of July to watch the
Yeah.
fireworks.
Yes, I
It was a
know you
great
did.
time.
So, yeah, 4th of July was a big thing in Morning Sun where I
It
grew up.
was.
So, yeah.
And actually, you just take that event by itself. I mean, there was a lot of things happening. You didn't go just to watch the fireworks. There was a lot happening before that. I mean, the town put on. I mean, there were vendors there.
Yeah.
People were sitting together. You met other people there. You had a really positive social experience.
Yeah.
Sometimes there was music playing.
Yeah.
Live music playing. It was a big deal. In fact, the lines to get there in your car were like stretched miles of taillights to get
Yeah.
into Morning Sun.
And it's so strange for a town of about 800 people.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we would balloon to about 10 or 15,000 on the 4th of July. Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
so what else comes to mind for you, man?
Well, going going places with groups of people, small groups or large groups. I think that's an important part of a third place. Um, on a Friday evening, there are a group of people that my wife and I often will gather together with for dinner, um, just for an hour and a half for a quick dinner and kind of ending the week and talking about kind of what's been happening and providing providing a lot of support for each other, um, and also just kind of listening to kind of what's been happening in their lives. Additionally, I think I've referred to this group a number of times. I have this coffee group I go to, which actually started while I was working. My boss at the time started this coffee group on Friday mornings, and he said, "Lamar, put this on your schedule. Leave work. I like to have you there." So I started actually while I was working, going to this coffee group, and it's kind of an eclectic group, and we talk about everything from the corn and wheat to trucking, to politics, to what's going on in our lives, and everybody has a place at the table, and there's not a hierarchy of relationships, and it's just a lot of support. It's a lot of laughing, and a lot of good coffee.
Well, we do something similar here. We started before the pandemic having a monthly dinner group, and it was kept to about 7 or 8 people, so that it was, everybody could literally have a seat at a dining room table, and we would go from home to home, rotate around, and be in each other's homes. Of course, the pandemic kind of messed that up, but actually, just this year we've started doing them again, except they're lunches, and it's bring your own lunch. Because we all agreed it was going to be way too much work to do so much cooking all the time. So for so many people, but same thing. We share book ideas, movie ideas, TV show ideas. We talk some politics. We talk about local politics, our local HOA, and stuff like that. But it's really good because we've really become good friends as a result.
And these are places where we kind of exercise some of those third space concepts and behaviors that
Yes.
we've been talking about for quite a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
Um, I think of places that are conducive to this kind of a gathering, like coffee shops.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we have two or three in this small town of 3,500 people. And so if you don't like one, you go to the other, or if you have a group. However, those groups can become so exclusive that they're just all about the same kind of perspective.
Yeah.
That, I think, is a concern that I would have.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in being part of just the same mindedness over and over again, because I think diversity of multiple types of diversities in thinking and perspective is a real value.
Yeah. Well, I'm also kind of conscious of time here in terms of what we got going on here, Lamar.
Sure.
Maybe we can just kind of wrap through some of these other places we were
Yeah.
thinking about, like churches, places of worship, parks, youth and school events. Yeah, even if you don't have kids, you may be in one of those places where, the best thing going on in your community is a school event. So you go, right? Football
Hmm.
game or something of that nature. Recreation centers, hairdressers and barbers, one of my favorite places. Oh my gosh.
You've always enjoyed those.
I have always really enjoyed barbershops. Everything from the smell of the barbershops to just listening in on the conversations. You learn so much. Um, Even if you don't know anybody involved, you still learn a lot. Of course, growing up in a really small town as I did, I would hear conversations about people that I knew. And so it was kind of a way of staying up on the local. It was social media before digital, I guess you might
Yeah,
say,
that's right.
right? Yeah. And we're thinking about restaurants you may hang out at the bar or at a pub, and actually we were talking before coming on to do this podcast about times that we would just spend in friends' homes, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And once again, sometimes I think we think about these places as taking a lot of time and energy. Um, and and you mentioned that you bring your own food to some of the dinners you're talking about, because oftentimes we can get caught up in the logistics of trying to make a place for us to get together versus just getting together. And so I highly encourage thinking about the easiest way for us to be able to spend some time with people, and people maybe that are not normally connected to us, but finding ways to to fo- to focus in on conversation and relationship building, and less on the logistics of making things happen. Do you think we're losing our places, Tom?
What we are losing some spaces that are really some places that are really important for having these third space conversations. But we also found in some of the research that you pulled together for this a little bit of information on that. Do you want to share some of that?
Yeah, and we've referred to Butler and Diaz before in an article that they wrote on third places um, as community builders. And they're suggesting that these third places are at risk. And I think it's important for us to maybe think about what kind of risk these are, and why they're at risk. You know, these places that we've talked about, I think I'm very fortunate. I mentioned this in the conversation we had with Seth Kaplan. In the community that I live, there are coffee shops and there are churches and there are social groups and I can just keep going down that list. But that's not the case in a lot of places. Um, you know that actually some of the brick and mortar centers are going away. In Wichita, Kansas, which is just down the road, one of my favorite coffee shops was actually torn down, and it's like, wow. Now, what's in its place is a store, a retail store, which is fine, um, but those places, um, I think, are really important. And I do understand that there are more that are coming, um, but I am concerned that along with Butler and Diaz, that there may be a risk at us finding those places. In fact, you mentioned going through the whole COVID experience, where we weren't even allowed to go to those places, um, and what kind of impact that might have had. Maybe we're going more digital than we ever have before. Just this podcast, just you and I doing this. The plus side is you're in Maryland and I'm in Kansas, and we're able to pull this off. The downside is, we haven't sat down literally for coffee for years.
Right. That's absolutely true. Well, while we're talking about the fact that we are losing some of these places, which is true by and large, where I'm located, I have noticed though that just in this last year, there are three new places that are popping up.
Oh,
One
that's
is a
cool.
one is a coffee shop that's about 6 miles from here, in the next town over, Burtonsville. It's called Centrado, and so if you live in this part of the country, check it out. It's a wonderful coffee shop, and they have really great baked goods from the Passion Bakery, by the way. And there's another place that's about ready to open here where we live, about a mile away. It's called a Cakery Cafe.
Oh, that
That
sounds
that's a
delightful.
That sounds, yeah. And then across the street, there's a place that's opening that is going to have kind of a coffee shop in it too. So I'm really pleased to see that there are some new places that are kind of appearing. But we've come through a rough period where a lot shut down, and
Yeah.
we just lost an awful lot of those places because they just couldn't keep up without having, because we all disappeared into our homes for a while.
But so maybe we're seeing kind of the pendulum swinging back a little bit,
I
which
hope so.
I would be very excited about. And again, I think we also need to be fortunate, say that we're fortunate because we have opportunities in some areas. But Kaplan was very clear, I think, that there are a lot of areas that don't have that kind of an opportunity for people.
Yeah,
It has to be created.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, uh, as we wrap things up, just want to kind of remember where we're going today. We've been talking about third space for a long time. But as we begin thinking about this, we want to remember that there are places that are really important to have relationships and communications from. First place with our home, that those communications are really important. To second place with our families, I'm sorry, with work and the goals and the workspace relationships that we have built and create, and then kind of that in between of that that third place. Um, I think of the coffee cafe, or I think of all these uh, spaces that we talked about. They're outside of the home typically. They're outside of work, and they're a social gathering place for us. And so I just want to remember that we have those kinds of focus today on places where spaces can happen.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm wondering, Lamar, too. I know we're kind of getting to the point where we do need to close, but
Yeah,
I wanted to check in with you on something. So, um, two questions really. The first one is, where was your favorite place to hang out? Where was your favorite place to just to go and connect and be with friends or be with
yeah.
people?
You know, I grew up. The place I grew up in Iowa. I was very fortunate that we had a class in high school that I think was very close with each other, and I was part of a variety of different groups, from athletics to music and drama, to religious groups, faith-based groups, and the people in the community, the adults in the community were extremely supportive, uh, having various leaving their homes open for a lot of us to come and just hang out at their places. Sometimes with a party atmosphere, sometimes with just dropping by and hanging out for a Friday evening for a while. Uh, I think those opportunities were really important for me, very positive for me. Also, there was organized activities that I was a part of. I was probably um, maybe involved in too many organizations at one point, but having those opportunities to be in a structured environment as well, whether it be in a music group or concert, or whether it was in, like I said, an athletic group that was traveling, those were very valuable times in my development as well. So I would say I hung out a lot in homes, and then with various activities groups that I was part of.
I
How
think
about how about
I
you?
I think I seem to hang out where there was food.
Yeah.
For a time, my parents ran this restaurant in my hometown, and I remember spending a lot of time in the restaurant, and probably I didn't interact with people as much as I could have or should have, I became very good at pinball. I just want to say,
Oh,
yeah, they had a great
pinball
pinball
wizard.
machine there. Yeah, I love that. But the other place that really comes to mind for me was a place in Des Moines, Iowa, when I worked in Des Moines. It's called Zanzibar's, and it was a independent coffee shop that was started by a young woman. It's still there, I believe,
Okay.
and I would sometimes I would take it was on Ingersoll Avenue in Des Moines. If you happen to be there, and I would go into Zanzibar's and sometimes have staff meetings in Zanzibar. Sometimes just meet
Wow.
friends there. And there's a guy that I would meet there on a regular basis. We just go in there and sit and drink coffee on Tuesdays and solve the problems of the world.
Well, I'm glad somebody was.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Sounds like a great place.
yeah, but don't blame us if things have gone off the track. Okay. The other question I wanted to ask you is, so Butler and Diaz say that third places are at risk. Do you think the first and second places are also at risk?
I've been thinking about that, and I think that there's risk for any way that we socially connect. Yeah, I think families, uh, and we mentioned this earlier, that families have this risk of not talking about things that are important to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that a big part of that is because we have drawn these lines, and we have now I think a further gap between our positions, and we don't have the kind of tools that you and I have been talking about, and others, on how to bridge those gaps. We don't we don't hold that tension very well. I think in the future we're going to talk more about holding tension. We
Yeah.
don't hold that tension very well, so that we can continue to have communication. So I think within families, there's concerns there that I have. I think at the workplace too, there's probably some of that, but I have less concern, I think, about that second space, second place, uh, being able to communicate, because I know that there are programs and there are emphasis on working at developing skills and competencies and communication skills and opportunities for good communication. So I come from that world most recently, so I'm pleased with kind of that focus there. But um, but yeah, I would say those two spaces I have concerns about. We just talked about the third, kind of that third place concern as well, with our social gatherings outside of those areas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I suppose it's that time when we look ahead
Okay.
to what's coming up. So our next podcast is going to feature an interview with Ed Schrager. Ed is from the United Kingdom, and he is very involved in working with organizations around helping them to make more human connections with one another within those organizations and outside the organization. So
Hmm.
it fits in very nicely with what we've been talking about today.
Remember, we try to be responsive to suggestions from listeners. However, we do need to hear from you. Interestingly enough, I'll get personal conversations. People will get in, want to have with me outside when I meet with them here and there, and that's great, wonderful. But feel free to share those comments and questions so that both Tom and I have a chance to read those and hear from them. There are a couple different ways to be in touch. First, you can leave us a voice message on Spotify if that's where you're listening to this podcast. And of course, we both have emails where you can contact us. And mine is lamar.thirdspace@gmail.com. And Tom's is tom.thirdspace@gmail.com. And remember, third space is spelled with a numeral 3.
All right. Very good. Well,
Yeah.
hey, I guess it's time to go deal with the cold stuff again, right? So,
It is.
oh
And
my gosh.
it's getting a little bit warmer, but we might be above 0 right now.
Well, yeah, and here I got to tell you, there's not much difference between 24 degrees and 26 degrees. It's feels pretty much the same to me. Either way.
All right.
All right.
Well, let's take care of ourselves, and we'll catch you on the next time.
All right. See you later, Lamar.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Lamar here. Thank you for listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. Remember to click on subscribe to be sure you get notices about new episodes. Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom is a production of Tenacious Change. Opinions and ideas expressed in this podcast are solely those of Lamar Roth and Tom Klaus. And we'd like to hear your opinions and ideas too. You can leave us a voice message on Spotify, or you can email us at the addresses found in the show notes. Also, in the show notes, you can find links to some of the things we talk about today, so you can check them out yourself. Until next time, keep moving toward third space.